Mm. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us from. My name is Dalia, and I work as a community manager here at Kong. I'm very happy to welcome you to our May Tech Talk. Today, we're going to give you an introduction to Insomnia, and we're going to talk about API development and testing. We have Felipe with here today. He will introduce himself and tell you a little bit more about his background. This webinar is being recorded, so you will have access to the recording afterwards. It will be on our YouTube channel. I will put the link to our YouTube channel here in the chat, so you have access to it. Here there is a Q&A function on the bottom. Please input all of your questions there rather than in the chat so we can keep track of what questions you want to ask, and Felipe will answer them after he's done presenting. So with that, Felipe, please take it away from here.
All right. Thank you, Dalia, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Philippe. I'm an engineer with the Insomnia team. Now, if there's folks in the audience that are Arch Linux hardcore users, my credentials are I own a refurbished ThinkPad with Ubuntu installed. Now, I promise I will install NixOS at some point. I promise. I have a friend that uses NixOS, so that should cover my credentials with the more hardcore technician, tech savvy crowd. Let's jump right into it. I only have this slide and everything else was going to be just pure demonstrations. So some things might go wrong. Bear with me if they do. Hopefully not. And I will only want to basically give you like a brief introduction around 4 different things. One of them is how you can use and why, and how you can use like an API client like Insomnia to help you build your APIs and test them, how you can keep track of that and share experiments that you do while you're tinkering with your API, a little bit about how you can, for instance, go a level upwards and, for instance, start dealing with API specifications and how you can abstract away some of the work that you might have when you're designing an API. And then we're going to go also a bit into how you can design very easy to do sanity checks for Insomnia while you're trying to test your API. Now, with everything in life, we learn better with an example. Usually, it's been a long while since we've done one of these. I would use an example with a dinosaur park, trademark not infringing. Today, I have a slightly different example to show you folks. A very simple one at that. And let's say fictional hypothetical scenario. Someone asks you to design an app, to create an app, and the app does something as simple as this. You want to create a grocery list that you can carry with you when you go shopping. You know which groceries you need to get. Now, in terms of, you can think of like 100 million different UI and user experiences that you would have for a grocery list. You can use like a text editor, you can use anything that comes to your mind. In terms of an API, we can do it in a very simple approach. For instance, I have here, even if you don't, for example, if you're not very into Python programming language, I have here a very, very simple example. It doesn't even have anything, like a database or anything extraordinary. It's just a very simple example where I define a couple of endpoints, as you see here. For instance, one is to add a grocery, and we can more or less realize, okay, it's adding grocery to this array of groceries. The other one is to get all the groceries that we have, and there's another one to delete a grocery. That's more or less it that we would need in terms of like logical API endpoints to build this like fictional application, so to speak, or actually a real application. So let's go ahead and some programmer gave me this code. We're just going to run it and see what happens. And let's just go ahead and do Python 3 example server to spin up our test server. Now, our test server should be running, as it says here, on locally on port 5000. That's good. So we can go up to Insomnia, and here comes the part where this is like the first thing to help you get into the matrix, so to speak, of things. That is, why would you even need Insomnia? Like, the most tech savvy of us will tell you, yeah, of course, you could do some unit checks to test this API code, or you could send curl requests or specify a list of curl requests to check this API code. Now, the power of using an API tool like Insomnia doesn't come from following that more traditional path. It comes from what it enables you to do in terms of like learning more about the thing that you have actively running on in this case on my machine, but it could be running on a server. Let's go ahead here into the, this is what you'll see for the most case when you boot up Insomnia and you log into your account and whatnot. Of course, here I have a handful of personal projects. I have a handful of organizations with a lot of top secret stuff that I can show you today. You'll see here, notice like mock server. What's this mock server thing? My colleagues, Mark Kim and another colleague will talk all about that next week at another, I think next week, May 23rd. Is that next week? I'm not sure. They will talk more about it at some point later on. Let's go right into it. I have a collection here prepared with a couple of requests that I've prepared. Now, typically when you're tinkering and interacting with an API through Insomnia, the gist of it is you of course need to point it to a URL. You can define a handful, notice here you can define a handful of parameters, you can define a request body, you can define authentication headers, and there's a handful of other things here. Now, when you send that request, if you're sending it to a website, of course, you're going to get whatever you would get if you were sending this request to a browser. If you're sending it to an API, it can be something like, for instance, I have an API that controls this light here that makes me, that eliminates all my old acne and whatnot. So I can turn off this light and notice that no light, and I can turn it on. What I'm effectively doing, notice, is I'm sending an API request to something that is hosted somewhere with this JSON body with these parameters, and in turn it's replying me with some response. API clients, and Insomnia in particular, we let you even go an extra mile in the sense that you could, in theory, define a couple of extra magic steps here, environment variables, where you can tinker with what you send before you actually send it. We're not going to go very deeply into that just yet. So, and of course, one of the things that these types of API clients allow you to do is not just sending requests to a website or requests to an API endpoint that's hosted using HTTP. They allow you to, for instance, and Insomnia in this case allows you to send requests like to gRPC, WebSockets, GraphQL, and even server-side events and whatnot. So you can not just tinker with HTTP-based REST APIs, but you can tinker with other kinds of APIs. Now, like I said, going back to our groceries API that we're trying to build here. I wanna, some programmer gave me this code. They want me to check and build on top of it. Maybe they've shared with me this code on Git. Doesn't really matter for now. I want to see what's happening when I interact with this API. So for example, let's say I already have here pre-programmed a couple of endpoints, but notice that these endpoints, they're pretty much, showing me what I already have defined here on the API code, in the sense of, for instance, I know I have an endpoint for add grocery. So I have here add grocery with path. It's pointing to localhost 5000, which I know is where my server is running locally here. And I can go ahead and try to send and add a grocery. I forgot to buy towels. I need to buy towels. Maybe I need to buy more apples, and I need to buy a famous Portuguese beer brand, Super Bock, which is, no matter what people might tell you, this is the best beer brand. I don't know, I don't drink beer, but this is the best beer brand. Hopefully what I just said is not career limiting. I'm not sure if we can say these kinds of things on the webinar, but let's add the other one just for good measure, because we are good Samaritans. All right. Seems that this endpoint is working. It's not telling us a lot. When we add something to our grocery list, we can go here into, there's a handful of headers here that we can check, like things that the server is replying back to us. There's a timeline here where we can see in detail, like what is happening when we're trying to connect to the server, what kind of headers and what kind of responses is returning to us and whatnot. Now, there's other endpoints that we can try out and tinker with. There's the get groceries. Let's see, what is that returning? I expect it to return towels, apples, Super Bock, and Sagres. Yeah, seems to be okay. So our grocery list, if some UI engineer would pick this up, they would be able to parse this response and print it somewhere on a magical UI, but at least API-wise, we're good. And we can delete a grocery. In fact, I don't think I need to buy the towels. I have plenty of towels here. So let's go ahead and delete the towels. And I'm assuming if I send a request again, all right, towels is no longer on my list. Up until this point, you might be wondering, all right, what's the value in this? Like, yeah, I expect it to work. I expect the code to work. What's the value in this thing? The value comes from what you can do after this. That is, where you can learn through experiments against your API. And that's a lot of times that's the value of that comes from testing and when you're building an API. For example, we can be a bit malicious here. We can say, all right, what happens when I don't send anything to this grocery list? It still is replying me with 200. So the server is still replying to me 200. Okay, grocery added successfully. What does this mean? What's happening here? I'm not saying anything. I try to get the groceries and I have there a null. It looks to me like a bug. And notice that this kind of thought experiment, was very cheap to, in the sense of like effort for me to conduct and to see, all right, here's a possible bug. Now, of course, I'm the only one that knows this right now in my fictional team that's building this magical grocery list API. And we want to take that to the next level. And the next level, and one of the things that I mentioned early on is, how can I even, use these learnings, share these experiments and whatnot? Let's go ahead and do something. Let's go put this back to where it was. So for instance, it was grocery, and I think it was something like towels. Yeah, should be fine. And let's do something a little bit malicious. We're going to duplicate this request and say add invalid grocery. And let's go ahead and change this. So we have a record in time of an experiment that we conducted that we can, I remember, what was the request to try to reproduce that bug where I'm trying to send an invalid grocery, so to speak, to my list? Oh, it's this one. All right. So we can go ahead and send it. All right. This should be a straightforward way for us to reproduce this, or for us to share how could other folks in our team could reproduce this problem. Now, how do we share that with the team? There's a handful of ways for us to do that. I'm going to show you like the most easy to do ways that you can do if you grab Insomnia today and you need to share these kinds of experiments with other teammates. The first thing and the easiest thing that you can do is you can go up here to your collection name, to this dropdown. There should be an export button. This export button. Now, I don't want my colleagues to have I don't want them to be able to control my lights. They probably don't need all of these different requests, but I do want them to have my groceries example, and I do want them to have like an example of this invalid grocery that I'm adding. All right, so we're going to go ahead and export that. We can export it into a file that they can then import into Insomnia. So for example, I can do this. Do I want to export private environments? Now, like I said, we're not going to talk about environments for this webinar just yet. Well, I'll mention it a bit briefly in a minute. So we're just going to say no. And it's offering me to save, export my collection and save it in a file. Let's just put something here, export, and it should be there on my desktop waiting for me. So for example, let's say that I'm not Philippe right now, I'm someone else. And Philippe just sent me an email. I found a bug on our API. It's outrageous. Why is this not working? Help me understand. All right. And they send us this attachment, this file as an attachment, which we can go here and import. We can choose the file from the import, and there it is for us. Open it, scan. It has a handful of requests, which should be the ones that we decided to export just a minute ago. And notice I have here, like in this case, a duplicate with just the request that I want. And if being the other developer, I can quickly check, okay, if I send, what was Philippe sending here? Oh, he's sending like an empty JSON body. And what does this cause? Oh, it causes like a handful of null entries on the grocery list. All right, that's cool. That's one way of sharing. You export the file, you send the attachment. That's like the traditional way of sharing. There are other ways. So for example, let's go ahead and delete this duplicate one. Hopefully it's not the one. Okay, I deleted the right one. There are other ways to share this. So for example, notice this button here that's almost blinding my vision here. Invite. In theory, even if, and you can do this, for instance, the moment that you register with Insomnia with a free account and whatnot, you can invite your friends, your colleagues and whatnot to your own like personal project, so to speak, and you can share with them like all of these different projects. They can sync them on their machine, and you can share all these kind of things with your colleagues. So for example, you could go ahead here and say invite. This will open up the website here. I just want to be able to invite, of course I see like a handful of organizations. I just want to invite, say, a colleague of mine here. I want to invite James Gatz at conghq.com. And I'm going to press invite there. And it's asking me for my passphrase. My passphrase, now let's keep it a secret between us. My passphrase is 1234. I'm just kidding. It's the number of your credit card, actually. 1 second, please. And let's copy paste it here. All right, let's go ahead and send an invite to James. Now, James on his Insomnia, he's going to see like an invite pending for him to join. And afterwards, he's going to be able to like tinker with all kinds of collections that I have here. That's yet another way of sharing. There's a third way of sharing, and will lead us also to the next topic that I want to talk to you folks about. It is Git sync. So for example, you can, in theory, store your Insomnia collections with Git, and you can Git clone them here. I have an example right here waiting, like I told you in the beginning, I have like this old Dino Park example, and this is coming straight from GitHub. If I pull here history, all right, let's not look at the history. It has a bunch of ugly commit messages, but this is being pulled from Git. And if I want to collaborate with other people just using Git, technically I can, for instance, using this method. Now, let's make a short break here and let's look at this example here. Notice that I have here a specification of an API. I have here a handful of information where I'm seeing like a handful of endpoints described in some weird specification. The cool thing about this weird specification, which is actually known throughout the world as open API specs and Swagger specs, is that when you're building an API, you can auto-generate these kinds of specifications in most cases, and for most programming languages and HTTP frameworks or other kind of frameworks, there's usually plugins that help you generate these specifications. From these specifications, you can do a cool neat trick here on Insomnia. That is, you can, for example, generate a collection. And collection here in the sense of you can generate requests here, which you can use to tinker with and play with your API. So for example, all of this information that, for instance, might have been encoded already for us by architects in our team or by other engineers, or it's auto-generated whenever we update like to a new version of an API, it helps us in turn create all of these requests, which we can use in tests. Let's just check if everything is okay with our Dinosaur Park API. Everything's okay. Let me just, I forgot to tell folks that the Velociraptor enclosure is not okay. All right, nothing to see there. Everything is okay. Now, this brings me, we looked a bit at, Git sync sharing. We looked a bit at specification, whatnot. This kind of using specs of APIs, not only is it helpful for you when you're designing an API and whatnot, it also helps us, for instance, devising tests. So for example, I have here a little specification that I prepared for our grocery API. Now, even if you don't understand whatever is written here, the logic of and the gist of it is I have here specified with the way that each of those endpoints should behave, kind of like what they should return, what service I have available, and whatnot. When I pressed earlier to generate collection, it generated already for me the same kind of request that I had to do by hand, which I had done from previous work, already generate these for me, and we can go ahead and, for instance, from this, tinker already with our API. Now, we saw in the Dynamo part, when we see here that from the spec, we're able to create what we call in Insomnia these test suites and these unit tests and whatnot. I have already here an example of a test, and this test, what does it say? We should not be able to add an invalid, we should not be able to re-add the same grocery item. All right, someone already worked on the spec and created a test for us, which is failing at the moment, that is telling us that our API, in our API, we should not be able, for example, to add towels and then add towels again as a repeated item. Now, backtracking a bit, you remember that bug that we found out earlier? We found out a bug that was, what was it? Oh, you could add an invalid grocery. So if you send something like this, it would still work. So, all right, we can go ahead, go to our grocery API spec, go to the tests, and let's actually create a new test. For this new test, let's say we should not be able to, let me think, that this is the hardest part of software development, is naming things. What do you name your test? Oh, this test is not obeying the religious rules of some testing community or some other testing community. This happens, I'll just, for the sake of demo, say something like, we should not be able to send invalid groceries. We shouldn't be able to add invalid groceries. And of course, there's already here a code snippet that we can use. We have to select here a request that we want to send. We don't have one, but we can prepare one. In the same fashion that we did before, for example, I can use this one that is already auto-generated. I can go ahead and duplicate it. And let's say this is going to be my invalid, like adding a grocery to the list, invalid one. All right, so what do we need to change here? We're going to go ahead and delete what we're sending in terms of like grocery. All right, send. All right, this should be able to reproduce the test. Now, of course, we need to change a bit the test code. We're going to try to send this invalid request, and we expect it to return like a 400 error response. In practice, this means that if I run both of these tests, they should both of them be failing, and they're telling me, all right, I was expecting a status code, and it's not the status code that I want. All right, let's try to fix these tests. Let's play the role of the developer that is upset, like these damn testers, they keep testing things out. Why are they finding bugs in my beautiful, perfect code? And let's try to fix it. Oh, okay, the developer already left here a fix. Uncomment this block to prevent duplicate groceries. All right, don't mind if I do. Let's go ahead and try to see if this works in our favor. If it, after this, if it makes the test pass. All right, everything should be okay. If I save, I think maybe the server will reload. The server reloaded. Let's run our test again. All right, we fixed that test where we should not be able to re-add the same grocery item. All right, cool. Let's see. Now we need to fix the other one where we should not be able to add invalid groceries. Again, this is fancy, kids. This is like test-driven development that we're doing here. All right, what can we do? Let's see if our old friend, our old reliable Copilot helps us. They're suggesting some code here. If not grocery, return grocery not provider. All right, don't mind if I do. Let's use whatever Copilot suggests us up until they replace us and we are all living in the street and fighting the robots. Let's run the test again. All right, tests pass. Now, like all developers, I don't trust what Insomnia is trying to tell me here that the test passed. I actually want to experiment for myself. Let's go ahead and do that. If I try to add an invalid grocery, I get a 400 baht request, grocery not provided. And we can go back. Let's say, for instance, if I try to send towels, I want to add more towels to my grocery list. Oh, it doesn't let me add more than one. All right, cool. Now let's recap everything that we've talked about up until now. We looked a bit at how you can experiment, use Insomnia to experiment with APIs, and it can help you like supercharge your API development efforts. We looked a bit at how you can share this kind of experimentation and this kind of knowledge base with other colleagues. We also looked a bit at how you can, for example, take this to the next level. For instance, if you're at the stage where you're maintaining API specifications, from these specifications, you can create also some of these requests automatically, which will then help you create some of these like unit checks against your API. And last but not least, we tinkered with tests. Now, there's more that we could have done here. We could have validated the response contents. We could have, you can do a lot more things with these tests and whatnot. We still have a little bit of time, so I also want to show you something that you might have noticed here. And this is just barely scratching the surface of what you can do like with a tool like Insomnia, so to speak. But for instance, notice here that I have this magical thing here. Base URL, where is this coming from? You might recall when I mentioned earlier about environments. Now, environments are a magical thing. If you're familiar with API clients, this is not going to be news to you. But environments are a magical thing where you can define variables, either static ones like these ones, for instance, scheme, base path, host, and this gets built up into a base URL. And this variable will then be translated the moment I send requests. Now, you might wonder, all right, but why do I need this? Why is this even valuable? The cool thing about this is I'm running this locally. If I want to share with someone that is hosting this on a server, if I want to run this against staging, production environment, whatever, you can, in theory, create a handful more environments where you can specify that this, for example, in production, let's say here, in production, this is going to point to some other, magical API where we host our grocery API. Before I let you all return to playing on your PlayStation 5, if you have it, or if not, PlayStation 4, I also want to talk to you that these are for static like variables. There's an extra thing that you can do with Insomnia that is, for instance, I want to test this in a way that every time, this is a very simple example, but I want to test this in a way that I don't care about this kind of example data here, but I want to, for example, I right click here, I want to use like a random string every time because I want to keep sending. I just want to check that we can always add grocery items to the thing. So we have here this faker thing that's out now in the 9.2.0 beta of Insomnia. Download the beta now. Let's see. Do they have random fruits? Random product. Let's put random product, see what happens. Send. All right. It added grocery. What did it add? A shirt. All right. That's cool. A hat and a pizza and whatnot. Now, what you might notice here is that we can both define like static environment variables, but you can also play, there's a lot more things that you can play around. If you're tinkering with an API that, for example, you would need all sorts of like different things where you would need, for example, things that you fetch from older responses, where you would need, things that you define in other requests, where you need a timestamp, where you need all this kind of information. You can play with it. So not only using environment variables, but also using these magical like template tags. And the cool thing is you can also come here and let's say if I have my product and I put here, hopefully it works. Let's see if it works. Oh, I need to add a comma here. I could in theory do the same. Random, where do we have it? Random product. All right, cool. Which means that here, instead of me sending like calling this figure thing, I can actually fetch it from my environment, which would be something like product. All right. And every time it's sending a new one, but I don't define here, I could keep my requests here clean and organized. And my environment handles this like heavy lifting of like, oh, all right, I want these to be like I don't care if it's like a random dynamic variable and whatnot. All right, that's pretty much everything that I want to show you folks today. There's a lot. Like I said, this just barely scratches the surface. Is just to give you the itch to try out. I think we are open for questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Amazing demo. Let's see the Q&A. We have 2 questions so far.
All right, let me, Prakash, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Prakash. What benefits can we gain from using Insomnia compared to Postman? That's a hard question, which I will leave to the next webinar, where our CTO is going to be there. He can give you like a better answer. What I can tell you off the bat, like from my own personal perspective, is the following. With Postman, you might notice that they are heavily investing in trying to cover a lot of different use cases for a lot of different things. Whereas in Insomnia, one of the things that we're trying to do is really helping your user experience in terms of like how you can specifically tinker with APIs, how you can specifically test APIs and whatnot. Now I know this might sound like a very high level question. I think simplicity also happens to be one of the key strong points of Insomnia compared to other tools. Not that those tools are not good. I think every tool is good and decent, and they serve their own purpose. It all comes down to what helps you in your experiments in your day-to-day. Now, Amit also asked, can it be used to do stress tests? Not yet. We might be looking into that sometime in the future. Not much I can tell you about that just yet. I see a couple more questions in the chat. What IDE are you using? I'm using Visual Studio Code. I hope that helps. But it's very zoomed in for the presentation. Can we automate using Jenkins? Yes, you can. Now, I'm not going to talk about it today, but one of the things that you can do is the following. We have a tool called InsoCLI, which allows you to run some of these tests that, for example, I just did for the grocery list. It allows you to run them in a console terminal-like environment. What that means in practice is you can run these tests, or you can run these collections in a CI, continuous integration environment. That can be Jenkins, that can be GitHub Actions, GitLab, whatever is your preference and whatnot. Yes. All right, we have another question hopefully that answered your question. I have another question by Satish. Is Insomnia a developer enablement platform for API development like Apigee, MuleSoft? I have to be honest with you. I'm not sure like what's the best way to answer this one. In the sense of like, it's not just, about developer enablement per se. It's more about, a tool that allows you to experiment with the API and to build API and whatnot. Not Apigee, MuleSoft, and all these other tools, they do slightly different things. But I'm not the best person to answer this question, if I'm strictly honest. All right. I have another question from Amit. Can the invitee see the history and the other stuff I have done in the collection I'm sharing? Or the invitee needs to reproduce the wanted response history and whatnot? Actually, I can show you really quick about this. Let me share my screen again. One of the things that I completely forgot to show you folks, a really quick example, is the following. Yes, they can. For example, here I'm I added this invalid endpoint. If I share this with other people from my team, they will see this at a time where I shared this with them. In order for them and for me to show them like the latest things, they will need to come here on this section here that handles the synchronization, and whatever changes that they're willing to commit, like to the remote, to the Insomnia cloud, they need to come here, press commit. I can decide which of these I actually want. I actually want them all, so I just pressed plus on all of them. And I'm just going to say, what's a message that could help my rest of my teammates? Work in progress. Commit and push. It's a typical commit message that we all love to use. Commit and push. And what happens is on the side of your other colleagues, which you have shared this collection, they will be able to either, for example, press this pull button to pull like the latest changes, and then they will see these requests that you have defined, or they will be able, for example, to create their own branch where I say, I just want to do some things, but I don't want everybody to see them unless they want to, pull this specific changes and try them out. So I'm just going to create one here, for example, Philip, experiment. I create this branch, and I can do, notice that I changed here the branch I'm working on. I can do different changes and different commits to this branch that other folks can pull, but they can also point like to the main branch, so to speak, and if they just want to, run whatever is in main. That would be more or less how you can go about like sharing all of these different things. It works very much like Git would work. Now, if you've never used Git or if you're not used to working with Git, don't worry, it's nothing like super hardcore to learn. It's just a matter of grasping about these concepts of like pushing a commit and pulling like changes that are on someone else's branches. All right, I see another question. Is the invitee able to see also the environment variables that I created? I don't know if this was already replied. Yes, they are, if and only if you have defined a shared environment. Whatever you put here in terms of, for example, let's say that here I have, a shared environment that is going to be staging, but then I have I want to have a private environment, which I don't want pushed out into the Insomnia cloud. That is, let's say top secret, something like this. And when I'm about to, commit these changes, notice that the only one that gets suggested is this new staging environment. The other one that I specifically set as a private environment, that one won't show up for me to share it with the rest of the world, so to speak. Hopefully that answers your question. All right, let me see. Do we have any more questions? Can we fork like we do in Postman? Yes, in theory you can. And you can, for example, let me show you really quick the kind of things that you can do in terms of like forking. Let me share my screen again. One of the things that you can do is, let's say someone from your team is working on this. You can, in theory, duplicate this, and you can duplicate it into like a separate project. For example, let's say that here is not this fully personal workspace, but it's one of these other organizations because you're working in a team, and maybe this is like your team, and there's a handful of projects here. You could, in theory, for example, create like a local only project. Let's go ahead here and create local experiment. Why not? Create. I have this local experiment and I want to duplicate. Oh, I lost my thing. And I just want to fork like this collection into my local only experiment. In theory, I can do that. I can just press duplicate and I can send it to my local experiment. Duplicate. And notice what happens. I have here the same collection that I just forked, and it's under my local only project, so to speak. And you can do this but in a handful of ways. This type of like duplication and forking of other people's collections and whatnot. All right. Hopefully I don't see any more questions. If you have any other questions, feel free, or else you can also send us an email. I think that's it. Dalia, I'm not sure.
See
What's
if we
the
have
correct
any.
procedure now?
Yeah, trying to monitor. So yeah, I think that's it. We answered everything. Perfect. Thank you so much, Philippe. Thank you everyone who asked the questions. Here in the chat, if you go up, you will see that we have our next webinar on the 23rd. Our CTO and co-founder Marco will be presenting again on Insomnia. You will hear about Insomnia 9.0. The link is there, so please register and attend. And then above, you will also see a link to our YouTube channel. So the recording of this webinar will be there in about an hour or two, so you can rewatch it. Cool. Thanks,
All
everyone.
right.
Appreciate
Thank
you
you,
joining,
everybody.
and
Have a nice
yeah,
day.
see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.